For 7 months, everyone in the kingdom believed the Alpha King was dead. But while his kingdom mourned him, one woman was still standing behind the walls of Blackpine Keep. She had no crown, no army of her own, no royal blood, only a small infirmary, a handful of exhausted soldiers, and a pack of starving wolves that had nowhere else to go. Then the first army came. She survived. Then the second. She survived that too. By the time the third army surrounded the keep, the walls were burning, the food was gone, and the soldiers had stopped believing they would ever see their king again. But Mara refused to leave. Night after night, she walked through the snow carrying medicine to the wounded. She fed the wolves before feeding herself. She buried the dead beneath the pine trees and returned to the walls before sunrise. And then something strange happened. The wolves began following her. Not because she commanded them. Because she had saved them. Then, after 7 months of silence, a lone rider finally appeared beyond the mountains. The Alpha King had come home. Kael expected to find his fortress destroyed. He expected to find frightened survivors. He expected his wolves to run toward him. Instead, every wolf in Blackpine turned toward Mara. Even the enormous white wolf who had never obeyed a human lowered his head before her. And when the king saw that, he realized something that would change his kingdom forever. While he had been fighting to save his crown, the woman he had left behind had become the heart of his kingdom. For 7 months, the Alpha King was believed dead. For 7 months, a quiet woman with no royal blood held his border keep against 3 armies. She buried soldiers with her own hands. She fed starving wolves when the fortress kitchens had nothing left. She slept beside the gates because there was no one else she trusted to wake when the enemy came. And when King Kael finally returned through the mountain pass, he did not find the frightened pack he had left behind. He found every wolf in the fortress turning toward one woman and obeying her. The first snow of the year had begun falling over Blackpine Keep when King Kael rode away. It came softly at first, little white flakes settling on the dark roofs and the black branches of the pines. The mountains beyond the fortress were already silver beneath the morning light, their peaks hidden behind long strips of cloud. Blackpine stood alone at the northern edge of Vale Dawn. Behind it were the green valleys, the farms, the villages, and the roads that led toward the capital. Beyond it were the mountains. And beyond those mountains lived people who had never forgotten the old wars. The keep had been built into a cliff of dark stone generations ago. Its walls were thick enough to resist winter storms and high enough to make an army hesitate before attacking. Wolves had always lived around it, their tracks appearing in the snow every winter, their pale shapes sometimes visible between the trees. The people of Blackpine respected them. They did not hunt them. They did not feed them either. The wolves belonged to the forest. Or so everyone believed. Mara had never believed it was that simple. She was 28 years old and had spent most of her life inside the keep's small infirmary. Her mother had been a healer, and her mother before her had known which leaves stopped bleeding, which roots eased fever, and which flowers could make a dying man's last hours less painful. Mara had inherited the knowledge. She had also inherited something less useful. A habit of noticing things nobody else noticed. That morning, while soldiers prepared the king's horses, she stood outside the infirmary door and watched the forest. The wolves were silent. That was what troubled her. Usually, at dawn, she heard them. A distant howl. A rustle beneath the trees. Sometimes the soft crunch of paws in the snow. But that morning there was nothing. Not even birds. Mara pulled her grey cloak tighter around herself. Across the courtyard, King Kael mounted his horse. He was not yet the legendary ruler the songs would later describe. He was simply a young king carrying too much responsibility, with dark hair tied behind his neck and a scar along his jaw from the rebellion that had broken out in the southern provinces. He had spent the last year fighting men who claimed his crown was weak. Now he was riding north to end the rebellion before it reached Vale Dawn's heart. Nearly 200 soldiers were leaving with him. Captain Edrin stood beside the gate. 3 days, he called. Kael looked back at Blackpine. Then at the mountains. If I'm not back in 3 days, close the gates. Mara heard him from across the courtyard. She almost smiled. 3 days. Kings always believed danger could be measured in days. She watched him disappear through the gates. The iron doors closed behind him, and Blackpine became strangely quiet. By sunset, Mara knew something was wrong. A patrol had not returned. Then another. By midnight, the watchman on the western tower had seen smoke beyond the ridge. Not campfire smoke. Too much of it. Too dark. Mara climbed the tower steps carrying a lantern. The wind struck her face when she reached the top. Below, the valley stretched beneath the moon. At first she saw nothing. Then she saw movement. Thousands of tiny points of light. Torches. An army was coming through the trees. Mara's fingers tightened around the lantern. Behind her, the bell began to ring. Once. Twice. Then again and again until its deep sound rolled through the keep. Men ran across the courtyard. Doors slammed. Children cried. Horses kicked against their stalls. And somewhere beyond the walls, from the darkness of the forest, came the first howl. It was not a warning. It was a farewell. By dawn, the enemy had surrounded Blackpine. The first arrows struck the walls just after sunrise. The sound was terrifying. Wood hitting stone. Men shouting. Metal ringing. Horses screaming. Mara stood in the infirmary doorway as wounded soldiers were carried inside. The garrison commander, Lord Taryn, had taken an arrow through his throat before the first hour was over. There was no ceremony. No time for grief. His body was dragged into the chapel while the next wave of soldiers climbed the outer slope. The fortress needed a commander. No one wanted the responsibility. Mara looked across the courtyard. At the frightened villagers. At the wounded. At the soldiers who were staring toward the gate. Then she stepped forward. "Move the wounded below the eastern hall," she said. A young soldier stared at her. "You're a healer." "Today I'm whatever this keep needs." He hesitated. Then obeyed. That was how it began. Not with a crown. Not with a sword. With a woman carrying buckets of water through smoke. Mara organized the infirmary first. Then the kitchens. Then the wells. She counted every sack of grain. Every barrel of water. Every arrow. Every horse. She moved the children into the safest underground chambers and ordered the older villagers to boil water and tear cloth for bandages. When frightened soldiers asked what they should do, she gave them work. People feared silence more than danger. So she kept everyone moving. By the second day, the enemy had discovered the western wall was weaker. By the third, they attacked it constantly. Mara barely slept. At night she walked the corridors carrying a lantern. And every night she saw them. Wolves. They stood beyond the walls. White shapes in the snow. Watching. The largest of them was enormous, its fur almost silver beneath the moon. Mara noticed it had one front leg raised. Injured. She began leaving scraps of meat near the northern gate. At first the wolves did not approach. On the fourth night, the silver wolf did. It stopped several feet away. Mara crouched. She placed the meat on the snow. Then she backed away. The wolf waited. Its breath formed a pale cloud. Finally, it limped forward. It ate. Then it looked directly into Mara's eyes. Neither moved. And for the first time since the siege began, Mara felt something other than fear. She felt that she was not alone. The next morning, the enemy commander sent a message. Surrender before sunset. Mara read it beside the burning western tower. Then she looked toward the forest. The silver wolf was standing there. Watching. Mara folded the message. No. She did not know then that the wolf had already chosen her. She did not know that 3 armies were coming. And she certainly did not know that the king she believed would return in 3 days would be gone for 7 months. The first siege lasted 19 days. By the 6th day, the roads were gone. By the 8th, the enemy had destroyed the southern bridge. By the 10th, Blackpine's food stores had begun to shrink. Mara kept the numbers written on a piece of parchment beneath her pillow. 14 sacks of flour. 6 barrels of dried meat. 312 arrows. 27 soldiers fit for battle. 39 wounded. 86 villagers. And 12 wolves. She had never intended to count the wolves. They simply kept appearing. One morning there were 4 near the northern wall. Then 7. Then 12. The silver wolf came every night. He never entered the keep. He never begged. He waited. Mara began calling him Ash because of the pale grey colour around his eyes. One evening, she found blood on the snow. She followed the tracks beyond the northern gate. Ash was lying beneath a pine tree. A thin iron arrow was lodged in his hind leg. Mara froze. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. She looked toward the distant fortress. Then back at the wolf. "You're going to hate me," she whispered. She approached slowly. Ash lifted his head. His lips pulled back. Mara stopped. "I know." The wolf growled. "I know." She lowered herself to the snow. For several moments, neither moved. Then Mara placed her medical bag beside her. She opened it. Ash watched. She took out a strip of clean cloth. Then she waited. The wind moved through the branches. Snow landed on her hair. Finally, Ash lowered his head. Mara reached for the arrow. The wolf jerked violently. His claws tore lines into the frozen earth. Mara clenched her teeth. "I won't hurt you more than I have to." She pulled. Ash snarled. The arrow came free. Blood spilled across the snow. Mara pressed the cloth against the wound. Ash trembled. Then something strange happened. He stopped fighting. His massive head lowered until his nose touched her wrist. Mara's breath caught. She did not move. For a long moment, the wolf remained there. Then he stood. He limped into the darkness. Mara watched him disappear. The next morning, 3 soldiers found her footprints outside the wall. Captain Roran stared at them. "You went outside." Mara said nothing. "You went into the forest during a siege." "I treated an injured animal." Roran shook his head. "You risked your life for a wolf." Mara looked toward the walls. Someone had to. He wanted to argue. Instead, he walked away. That afternoon, he left a bowl of meat beneath the northern gate. Mara noticed. She said nothing. The siege worsened. The enemy had realized they could not break the walls quickly, so they changed their strategy. They attacked the wells. Every time Blackpine's defenders tried to draw water, arrows fell from the hillside. The eastern well became a death trap. Then the western well was poisoned. Mara discovered it when a child collapsed after drinking. She smelled the water. Bitter. Metallic. She dumped the entire barrel. That left one well. The northern well. It stood outside the strongest section of the wall, beneath open sky. To reach it, someone would have to cross the courtyard while enemy archers watched from the ridge. Mara volunteered. Roran grabbed her arm. "No." "Then who?" "I'll send soldiers." "Soldiers are needed on the walls." "So are you." Mara looked at the empty buckets. Then at the frightened villagers. She pulled her arm free. "I'll go." She crossed the courtyard carrying 2 buckets. The enemy saw her immediately. Arrows struck the stone around her. One cut her sleeve. Another buried itself inches from her foot. Mara kept walking. Her breathing became shallow. She reached the well. Filled the buckets. Then turned. For one terrible second, the entire world seemed silent. Then a howl rose from the forest. Another howl answered him. Then another. Then 10. The wolves burst from the trees. They did not attack the soldiers. They simply ran across the lower ridge. The enemy archers turned toward them. That moment was enough. Mara reached the gate. The soldiers pulled her inside. She dropped the buckets. Water splashed across the stone. Roran stared at her. Then he laughed. It was the first laughter anyone had heard in days. "You're insane." Mara wiped blood from her cheek. "Probably." The wolves disappeared into the forest. That night, the enemy stopped attacking. By morning, their camps were empty. The First Army had retreated. Blackpine had survived. People cried when they saw the enemy banners disappearing over the ridge. Some hugged one another. Some knelt. Mara simply sat against the infirmary wall and closed her eyes. For the first time in 19 days, she slept. She woke after sunset. Something was scratching beneath her pillow. Mara reached under it. Her fingers found metal. She pulled out a broken arrow. The shaft was black. The feathers were red. And carved into the metal head was the royal crest of Valedorn. Mara stared at it. The enemy had not stolen that arrow. Someone inside the kingdom had given it to them. Someone close to the throne. Someone who knew exactly how Blackpine would defend itself. Outside the infirmary, Ash began to howl. The second army arrived before the dead of the first siege had been buried. Mara was standing beside a grave when the bells rang. She looked up. Smoke rose beyond the mountains. Not one column. Dozens. The soldiers around her stopped digging. Captain Roran dropped his shovel. How many? The scout's face was grey. More than 5,000. No one spoke. Blackpine had fewer than 40 soldiers. Mara looked at the graves. Fresh earth. Fresh snow. Then she picked up the shovel. Finish burying them. Roran stared at her. The enemy is coming. So are the dead, Mara said quietly. They deserve a place to rest. That afternoon, the Second Army surrounded the fortress. This time they brought towers. Huge wooden structures rolled across the valley beneath leather coverings. They brought siege beasts. They brought fire. And most frightening of all, they brought maps. Maps of Blackpine. The enemy knew every gate. Every tower. Every weak wall. Every tunnel. Mara looked at the parchment. Her stomach tightened. Only the Royal Council possessed maps that detailed the hidden passages beneath the keep. The traitor was not merely inside the kingdom. He was close to the king. That night, Mara followed Ash into the lower tunnels. The wolf had begun appearing beneath the fortress. He moved through darkness with his nose close to the ground. Mara carried a lantern. The passage was narrow. Old stones pressed against her shoulders. At the end, she found a chamber. Bones covered the floor. Wolf bones. Human bones. And on the wall was an ancient carving. A wolf standing beside a crowned man. Below them was a single sentence in the old language. Mara could not read it. But Ash touched his nose to the symbol. The same symbol hung around his neck. A small silver pendant. Mara reached toward it. Ash allowed her. She felt something cold beneath her fingers. A strange warmth moved through the wolf's body. He looked at her. Then toward the tunnel leading outside. Mara understood. He was warning her. The enemy scouts were approaching. She extinguished the lantern. Seconds later, voices echoed through the passage. 2 enemy soldiers entered. Mara and Ash waited in darkness. One soldier whispered that the tunnels were clear. The other laughed. Then Ash moved. He struck the man's legs. The soldier fell. Mara grabbed the second man's wrist before he could shout. Moments later, both were bound. From them, Mara learned the enemy had received orders from Lord Varek. A name she knew. Varek was the king's most trusted advisor. He had been with Kael since childhood. The news was worse than the siege. It meant the enemy knew Kael was alive. And they were delaying his return. False reports had been sent south. Messages claiming Blackpine had already fallen. Messages claiming the northern road was blocked. Messages claiming the keep was abandoned. Kael was being kept away deliberately. Mara returned to the courtyard before dawn. She wanted to tell someone. But whom? The soldiers were exhausted. The villagers were terrified. And the traitor could have eyes anywhere. So she kept the secret. The second siege began. Fire struck the western tower. Mara watched flames climb into the sky. She organized bucket lines. She moved children underground. She ordered the wolves kept inside the lower courtyard during the worst attacks. Ash refused. He returned each night. Always through the tunnels. Always covered in snow. One evening he placed something at Mara's feet. A torn piece of cloth. It carried the royal seal. Mara picked it up. There was blood on it. And beneath the seal were 3 words. He is alive. Mara closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, hope entered the keep. King Kael was alive. Somewhere beyond the mountains. But alive. She held the cloth against her chest. Then the horn sounded. The enemy had begun another attack. Days passed. Food vanished. The wolves grew thinner. Children stopped asking for second portions. Mara opened the last storage room. One sack of grain remained. She looked at it for a long time. Then she ordered it opened. The grain went to the children, the wounded, and the wolves. Roran protested. What about the soldiers? Mara shook her head. They can wait. And you? Mara looked at the empty shelf. I've been waiting for a long time. That night, the soldiers shared their food with her. One brought half an apple. Another brought dried meat. An old villager brought a piece of bread hidden beneath her blanket. Soon the entire keep was sharing what remained. The second siege had changed them. They no longer fought because someone ordered them to. They fought because they belonged to one another. Then, just before midnight, the enemy commander stepped forward beneath the walls. His voice carried through the cold air. The third assault begins at dawn. Mara looked toward the black sky. Ash stood beside her. Snow gathered on his back. Mara placed her hand against his fur. Then we survive until dawn. Ash looked toward the mountain pass. And somewhere far beyond the darkness, a lone horse was running south. Dawn came red. Not from sunlight. From fire. The Third Army attacked every wall at once. Ladders struck stone. Rams crashed against gates. Arrows filled the air. Blackpine disappeared beneath smoke. Mara ran through the eastern courtyard carrying bandages. A tower collapsed behind her. Stone struck the ground. She fell. For several seconds, she could not hear anything. Then sound returned all at once. Screaming. Metal. Fire. Ash barking somewhere nearby. Mara pushed herself up. Blood ran from her temple. She looked at it. Then at the wounded soldier lying beside her. She crawled toward him. Stay awake. His eyes opened. I'm tired. So am I. She pressed cloth against his wound. You're still not allowed to leave. He smiled weakly. Then the gate exploded. The enemy poured into the outer courtyard. Roran shouted for the inner doors to close. Villagers ran. Children screamed. Wolves scattered into the tunnels. Mara stood in the middle of the chaos. The fortress was falling. She could feel it. For 3 sieges she had held Blackpine together with food, courage, kindness, and stubbornness. But stone could only withstand so much. The eastern tower was burning. The western wall had cracked. Half the soldiers were dead. And the enemy was inside. Roran came to her. We need to fall back. Mara looked at the courtyard. How many? 20 soldiers. Then we have 20. He stared at her. What? Mara picked up a sword from the ground. She could barely lift it. But she held it anyway. We have 20. They retreated to the inner fortress. The villagers barricaded the doors. The wolves gathered in the lower hall. Ash was missing. Mara called his name. Nothing. She searched the tunnels. At the far end, she found him standing before a stone wall. The wall carried the same symbol. The crowned man. The wolf. The ancient words. Mara placed the lantern beside her. She touched the carving. A section of stone moved. A hidden door opened. Cold air rushed through the passage. Beyond it was a mountain shrine. The chamber was enormous. Ancient pillars rose from the floor. Wolf statues stood on both sides. At the center was a stone throne. Behind it was another carving. Mara approached. This time she recognized the royal crest. But beneath it was the wolf symbol. She finally understood. The wolves of Valedorn had never belonged to the kings. The kings belonged to a promise made to the wolves. 4 generations, every Alpha King had sworn to protect the creatures who guarded the northern border. The wolves protected the kingdom. The kingdom protected the wolves. Until the royal court forgot the second half of the promise. Mara looked at Ash. You remembered. The wolf stepped closer. His head lowered. The silver pendant around his neck touched the stone. A hidden compartment opened. Inside was an ancient crown. Not a crown for a king. A small circlet made of silver branches. Mara did not touch it. She understood something else. The wolves had chosen her. Not because she was royal. Because she had fed them when she was hungry. Because she had treated their wounds. Because she had never demanded their loyalty. She had simply protected them. A terrible crash shook the mountain. The enemy had breached the inner doors. Mara looked at Ash. Then at the tunnel. We have one chance. They returned to the fortress. The inner hall was filled with smoke. Roran stood with the remaining soldiers. Mara stepped forward. We're not running. Roran looked at her. Then what do we do? Mara looked toward the tunnels. Open them. The wolves moved. One by one, they disappeared into the darkness. Minutes later, howls rose beneath the fortress. The enemy soldiers froze. The floor shook. Wolves emerged from hidden passages behind them. Dozens. Then more. The enemy formation broke. Not because the wolves attacked every soldier. Because fear did the work. Men who had expected wounded villagers found themselves surrounded by silent animals moving through smoke. Ash stood on the broken stairs. Mara beside him. For one impossible moment, the battle stopped. Then a horn sounded outside. Everyone turned. Through the smoke beyond the ruined gate came a rider. One horse. One rider. A black cloak covered in snow. The soldiers of Blackpine stared. Mara's breath stopped. The rider pulled down his hood. Dark hair. Scarred jaw. Eyes that had been absent from Blackpine for 7 months. King Kael had come home. Kael dismounted slowly. He had imagined this moment 100 times. He had imagined riding through the gate to cheering soldiers. He had imagined finding Blackpine standing. He had imagined Mara somewhere inside the keep, perhaps waiting for him with the other healers. He had not imagined this. Half the fortress was burned. Bodies covered the courtyard. The walls were cracked. Smoke drifted through broken windows. And beside the inner stairs stood a woman wearing a blood-stained grey cloak. Mara. She looked thinner. Older. There was a scar across her temple. Her hands were stained with blood. Ash stood beside her. Kael looked at the wolf. Then at Mara. The wolf lowered his head. Not to him. To her. Kael felt something twist inside his chest. He walked forward. Who did this? Mara looked at him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "We did what we could." Kael's eyes moved across the courtyard. We. Mara nodded. The soldiers. The villagers. The wolves. Kael looked at Ash again. The wolf stared back. Then he turned away from the king and followed Mara. Kael almost laughed. He did not. He was too stunned. 7 months of war had taught him how to kill. Blackpine was teaching him how little killing mattered when the people you loved were starving behind the walls. He entered the keep. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of Mara. Medical cloth tied around broken beams. Food lists written in her handwriting. Children's drawings pinned beside military maps. A bowl of water near the northern door. Wolves sleeping near the fireplace. One old soldier approached him. "Your Majesty." Kael turned. The man's eyes filled with tears. "We thought you were dead." "So did I." The soldier laughed through the tears. Then he pointed toward Mara. "She kept us alive." Kael looked at her. Mara was kneeling beside a wounded wolf. She was cleaning a cut along its paw. She never looked up. Kael walked toward her. "You should be resting." "So should you." A faint smile appeared on his face. It disappeared quickly. "You knew I was alive." Mara stopped. "How?" "Someone left us a message." Kael's expression hardened. "Who?" "We don't know." Mara showed him the royal arrow. Kael stared at it. His face changed. Varek. The name hung between them. Mara nodded. Kael's hand closed around the arrow. "I trusted him. That's why he was able to do it." Kael looked toward the ruined walls. "He told me Blackpine fell during the first month." "He lied." He told me the roads were destroyed. Some were. But not all. Mara shook her head. Someone kept you away. Kael's eyes met hers. And someone kept the enemy informed. Silence. Then Ash growled. Both turned. The wolf was staring toward the southern corridor. Kael followed his gaze. A soldier ran into the courtyard. Your Majesty. Kael turned. The enemy commander is gone. How? He escaped during the fighting. Mara's face tightened. Kael understood. Varric had not been at Blackpine. He had been using the army. And now he was running toward the capital. They found evidence in the enemy command tent. Letters. Maps. Orders bearing Varric's seal. One letter contained a plan to assassinate Kael if he survived the northern campaign. Another described how Blackpine would be blamed for its own fall. A third contained the most frightening truth. Varric had already arranged support among several nobles. If Kael died, they would place a puppet heir on the throne. Kael folded the letter. We ride tonight. Mara looked toward the wounded. Not tonight. He looked at her. We have to reach the capital. These people have just survived 3 sieges. We have to stop Varric. And we will. Mara stood. But not by leaving everyone behind again. Kael stared at her. 7 months ago, he had been king. Now, for the first time, he understood what it meant to lead. He nodded. Tomorrow. Mara looked surprised. Kael almost smiled. You held my kingdom for 7 months. His eyes moved toward Ash. And apparently my wolves. Mara's lips curved. I didn't ask them to. I know. There was something different in his voice now. Not command. Not jealousy. Respect. That night, Kael stood outside beneath the stars. Mara joined him. The valley was quiet. Ash slept near the gate. Kael looked at the wolf. Does he always do that? Do what? Follow you. Mara looked down. I don't know. Kael was silent. Then he said, he never followed me like that. Mara looked at him. You left. The words were soft. But they hurt. Kael lowered his eyes. I thought I was protecting this kingdom. You were. And you. Mara looked toward the broken walls. I was protecting what was left. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Kael stepped closer. I should have come home. Mara looked at him. You did. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning. By sunrise, Blackpine survivors were ready to leave. And among them walked the wolves. Not behind Mara. Not ahead of her. Beside her, the journey south took 11 days. Villages came out to see their king. But the people did not cheer first. They stared at the wolves. Dozens of them moved through the roads with quiet confidence, Ash always close to Mara. Children watched from windows. Farmers stopped working. Old women made signs against evil. Then one little boy stepped into the road. He carried half a loaf of bread. He held it toward Ash. The wolf stopped. Mara knelt. He's not going to hurt you. The boy placed the bread on the ground. Ash lowered his head. He took it gently. The boy smiled. By evening, there were bowls of food outside village homes. The wolves had become something different. Not monsters. Not servants. Neighbors. Kael watched it happen. He also watched Mara. She never took credit. When people thanked her, she pointed toward the soldiers. When they thanked the soldiers, she pointed toward the villagers. When they praised the wolves, she simply smiled. At the capital, Varric believed he had won. He stood inside the royal hall surrounded by nobles. He had already told them Kael was dead. He had already prepared the ceremony. Then the doors opened. Kael walked inside. Silence fell. Behind him came Mara. Behind her came Ash. And behind Ash came the wolves. Varric's face lost its color. Kael stopped in the center of the hall. Lord Varric. Varric tried to smile. My king. You have been waiting for me. I have been grieving you. Kael removed the letters from his cloak. Then you should have grieved more carefully. The court erupted. Varric denied everything. He blamed enemy spies. He blamed forged seals. He blamed dead messengers. Then Mara stepped forward. She placed the royal arrow on the table. This came from the First Army. Varric stared at it. Kael looked at the guards. Search him. They found another seal. The same mark. The same one used on the letters. Varric finally stopped smiling. His face twisted with rage. You think these people chose you? He pointed at Mara. A healer. His voice rose. She is nobody. The hall became silent. Mara did not move. Kael stepped between them. She was nobody to you. Then he turned toward the court. She fed my people when my advisor starved them. He pointed toward the soldiers. She defended my walls when my advisor opened them. Then he looked toward the wolves. And she protected creatures my family swore to protect long before I was born. Ash walked forward. The wolf stood beside Mara. The ancient silver pendant hung against his chest. Several nobles recognized it. The oldest among them whispered, "The Guardian." Mara looked at him. He bowed his head. Every generation has one. The court went silent. The wolves choose the keeper, the old noble continued. Not the crown. Kael looked at Mara. Everything became clear. The kingdom had not merely survived because of her. It had remembered something it had forgotten. Varric was taken away. His supporters were stripped of their titles. The false orders were read publicly. The names of the soldiers who had died at Blackpine were recorded in the royal hall. But Kael did not celebrate. He traveled north again. This time, he took Mara with him. At Blackpine, the rebuilding began. Stone by stone. Beam by beam. The eastern tower rose again. The wells were repaired. The villages received grain. And the wolves were given a protected forest stretching beyond the northern ridge. Mara asked for only one thing. No hunter would ever cross its boundary. Kael agreed. Then he gave her something she never expected. A ring. Not a royal ring. A simple silver band engraved with a wolf beneath a pine tree. Mara stared at it. What is this? Kael smiled. A promise. From a king. From a man who finally learned that he cannot protect everything alone. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Then she took his hand. Their fingers closed together. Behind them, Ash watched. The wolf turned toward the forest. A dozen white shapes followed him. Years later, travelers would tell stories about Blackpine. They would speak of the white wolves who walked beside the villagers. They would speak of the king who rebuilt the northern border. But most of all, they would speak of the woman who had stood on those walls when everyone else believed the keep was already lost. One winter morning, Kael returned from the capital. Snow covered the valley. He stopped his horse before the gate. Mara was walking through the trees. Ash moved beside her. Behind them came the pack. Dozens of wolves. Silent. Calm. Following her footprints through the snow. Mara looked up. She smiled. Kael dismounted. He did not call her name. He simply walked toward her. Ash approached first. The great wolf stopped before the king. For a moment, they stared at each other. Then Ash stepped aside. He returned to Mara. Kael smiled. I suppose I understand now. Mara raised an eyebrow. Understand what? He looked at the wolves. They were never waiting for me. Mara looked toward the keep. No. She took his hand. They were waiting for someone to stay. The wind moved softly through the pines. Snow fell between the branches. Behind them, Blackpine Keep stood whole again. Its towers caught the pale morning light. Smoke rose from its chimneys. Children laughed somewhere beyond the walls. And wolves slept peacefully beside the gates. Kael had once believed a kingdom was held together by armies. Then he believed it was held together by a crown. He was wrong. A kingdom was held together by the people who stayed when leaving would have been easier. By hands that fed the hungry. By hearts that protected the helpless. by loyalty given without being demanded. And sometimes, when a king was fortunate enough to come home after being gone too long, he discovered that the strongest person in his kingdom was not sitting on his throne. She was standing in the snow, with blood on her hands, a wolf at her side, and an entire kingdom quietly following wherever she went. Kael looked at Mara. Mara looked back. Neither needed to say anything. The keep was home. The wolves were safe. The dead had been remembered. The traitor had fallen. And the woman who had once been overlooked by everyone had become the heart of the kingdom. Not because she had wanted power. Not because she had asked for a crown. But because, when the gates closed and the armies came, she stayed. And sometimes that is what makes a person worthy of being followed. Not the strength to command, but the courage to remain.